I was at Tribeca Festival yesterday, and I think there are more people in this room than there are there. So amazing stuff. Great to meet you guys all. Myself, I'm going to start by asking, you were all journalists in traditional newsrooms once upon a time. Can you talk me through each your personal journey into this branded world? Maybe AJ, start with you.
Sure. Absolutely. I knew I wanted to be a journalist from a young age. And so I did that right out of college. And I worked at CBS and ABC affiliates mostly around the country. I did that for over a decade, and I kind of had an itch that I was ready to do something different. I wasn't sure what that was, or exactly what my skills would translate to. So I think, many people who leave journalism have that feeling. I really had to think about why did I always want to be a journalist? What was the essence of that? It really was about education and translating information to a way that was helpful for people. And so I started looking for those opportunities. I didn't know what the job title was going to be. I didn't know what that meant or where I was going to be landing. But I found the opportunity to move into kind of the tech world, the fintech world, and start as a content person at a team of 5 in a pre-Series A startup. I told my husband I had a few job offers, and I said, this one has the least security, the least pay, and I don't exactly know what I'm doing, and I'm going to choose that one. And luckily, he's very supportive, and he said, great.
And how long ago was that you went to?
And that was 15 years ago.
Okay, so an early one in this kind of realm,
yeah,
I'd say.
Yeah, I think a little before Noah's chart even of that move, yes. And then I've been doing that at companies ever since, at Smart Asset and at SoFi, at Hims and Hers, and now at The Point Sky.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Tracy.
Yeah, I started, same thing, journalism very early out of college. Started on the editorial side. I was at Men's Health right out of college, and then I kind of got into the international licensing and development. And so I went abroad for many years, and I worked on the business side of things. I worked for Dennis Publishing. We did Maxim, we did Evo, we did a bunch of car titles. And then came back to the States, worked in marketing and circulation for a while, and then just kind of like inched my way back into my first love of editorial. I went back to Women's Health and stayed there as a health director for about 7 years. And then before this job, I was the editor-in-chief of Yoga Journal. And so, when I got recruited for this position, I had been looking at getting out of traditional journalism for a while, just because I think no one here is immune to kind of some of the struggles and challenges, and just the business has really changed, over the past decade or so, especially. And so when I was approached about, joining Hone, they really wanted to kind of create an editorial organization within the company. And what really was attractive to me was it was kind of what we're talking about here, which was the opportunity to build something from the ground up, which I had worked in all of these traditional and legacy media organizations, which were wonderful and amazing, but never had the opportunity to kind of like really get my hands at the ground level and start building. So that was really exciting to me. And then to do it at a place and a company, that was in the health sector, that was kind of, my niche and my lane, and an organization that like was doubling down on scientific accuracy and accuracy of information. So it just felt very aligned.
Wonderful. And just for those who don't know Hone Health, can you tell us a little bit about the company?
Yeah, so Hone is a telehealth organization, kind of was a competitor of Hims and Hers for a while. So we're
still okay.
Yes, fine. But we treat both men and women. We traditionally started out in hormone optimization, but we've moved into long-term health optimization and care.
Wonderful. Sarah.
Okay. Well, it started with an English major degree, as all great things do.
Always useful.
Always useful. I remember just wanting to get, fresh out of school, I remember just wanting to get a job as an editor in any capacity. And so I remember being in my parents' basement in central Connecticut, like looking at Media Bistro listings, if we can all remember the Media Bistro era. And I just applied to everything with the word edit in it. And I ended up landing a job as an editorial assistant at a very small group of regional magazines in Princeton, New Jersey. It was the kind of magazine that you would get if you subscribed to the paper. It just sort of came with your newspaper subscription. And it was like 24 hours a week, $12 an hour kind of job. But it was really amazing to be a small fish in a small pond, because that's really like how you learn the business. That's how you do it. And from there, I moved into magazines. I ended up, running the features department of a group of luxury lifestyle sort of home design publications, still around, I think, Cottages and Gardens. And there, from there, I transitioned into the digital space. I launched the national edition of Curbed way back in the day, way pre-Vox Media acquisition. So it was that early days of Curbed, Racked, and Eater, sharing a space with Foursquare at the time and Cooper Square in East Village. And then from there, actually, I did spend 3 months at the Wall Street Journal, 3 very short months at the Wall Street Journal.
Tell me about that.
I will talk about it later. But I was recruited to Travel and Leisure as part of a new leadership team to crack open what the brand was doing from a digital standpoint. Rebuilding the team, rebuilding the content strategy, sort of figuring out who we were online in the sort of early days of Instagram, Facebook, this era. And it was a wonderful job, but it was a high burnout job, as so many of those sort of typical publishing jobs are. And I had an opportunity to sort of pick up a pretty solid freelance consultancy work with a division of Google that was sort of being spun up at the time, the Local Guides Initiative. So I used that to foray into self-employment, and I was self-employed for about 6 years. And I was able to sort of regain the brain space, to write again, to pitch again, to kind of get back into what I think brings us all to the stage today. Ended up sending 12 article pitches to the former travel editor of the New York Times, finally landed a story, ended up contributing features, launching a column for the section. And then I remember I had a 4-month-old baby and a 3.5-year-old on the beach in the Dominican Republic, and I got a ping from a recruiter being like, okay, this is going to be the job for you. I was like, absolutely not. No way. And here I am at Tripadvisor about 4.5 years later. So that's my story.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, I think one thing about journalism, despite the pay and despite the hours and the stress and feeling like you're going to get laid off every second, is that it's cool, right? You were writing features for the Times and Travel. That's incredible. How do you guys deal with the detachment from that world and being able to go to a party and say, oh yeah, I'm a reporter, or something like that? What do you tell people that you are now? And maybe, do you want to, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, you are. No, I think it is something that I think I struggled with for a while. I think at the time I left traditional media, I was also ready to leave. I think that made it a little bit easier. But yeah, it was like always nice to kind of have the big brands behind you and things like this. And now I tell people I run content for a healthcare company. And I think like that just personally for me, as I got older and I felt like I had kind of hit some of the career milestones that I had set for myself. And, I had like gotten to the top of the masthead, yay, but also was a high burnout job and, wasn't as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. And so I think like for me personally, that made it a little bit easier of just saying like, okay, well now I'm going to embark on the next chapter and kind of figure out what the next stage of my career looks like. And this is a really interesting space, brand journalism or brand editorial or whatever you want to call it was really kind of starting to pick up a little bit. And so it just felt like an easy transition.
Mm-hmm.
I relate to that a lot. If I can jump in, if that's okay. I had a really hard time kind of giving up the sexiness of a byline. I mean, when I got married, I didn't change my last name deliberately. Much to the chagrin of my father, et cetera. But I think that the identity component is really interesting because it does put you in the limelight in a way that, I don't know. I mean, I liked it at one point, but I felt very exposed, especially having 2 kids and wanting to have a little bit more of a private existence. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I was recruited to Tripadvisor and I knew that it would be sort of a step back from the limelight in a significant way, I was ready to sort of be a little bit more inward focused on my family and sort of on, going to work, really enjoying it, building something really creative, working with great people, all the things that we all want to do, but maybe not putting myself out there quite so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly as people get crazier on social media.
Totally.
And yeah, I can understand that. What about you, AJ?
Yeah. I think I did struggle with that, like what to write down as like what you do and how to fill that out. on paperwork that really no one's looking at, so it didn't matter. But it does matter because it is part of your identity. So I did struggle with that. And I think it does come down to how I had to boil it down for myself. What was important? Was I still doing the things that I really cared about? Was I still doing the things that felt important to me and felt useful, and a good use of my skills? And that became helpful for me. But and I would describe it. I would say I'm still a journalist. I just do it at a different kind of organization is how I would tell people, especially earlier on. Now I think I pretty much say I'm in marketing, but early on I was like I was closer to the content that I was still writing, I was still editing, and I would say I'm still a journalist. I'm just doing it in a different place with a different company.
Tracy, you mentioned you were building from the ground up in this job. What were some of the unexpected challenges, unforeseen challenges involved with doing that?
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of brass tacks level, it was, like the company had a website. It wasn't optimized to have content on it. So we're looking for a vendor and literally building the site from the ground up, which I had never done before. And then building a team. And I think that, that part wasn't very hard because, unfortunately, there were a lot of, and still are, unemployed journalists out there and editors. So bringing people in, I think, was easy. I think, all the stuff that came easily from my background, putting together editorial guidelines and style guides and that stuff was easy. The harder part was, kind of getting the marketer's brain and putting that on it and thinking okay, day to day, my job looks very similar. I'm fielding pitches and assigning and editing, and the KPIs are different. I think so many of us in journalism that kind of went through that shift to digital, it was always just about page views and users. And, suddenly that is a metric that matters. It still matters. But was kind of okay, but then what? Then what are they doing from this? So really trying to think of it. And I think, I mentioned before that I had spent time on the business side of magazines. And I think that was really helpful for me to I'd always looked, even as a journalist, at content and be like, okay, well, what's the reason we're doing this? What value is it going to deliver? And I think that was a transition for me, but it was also a transition for many of the people that I hired as we built the team, to kind of make that mindset shift a little bit. Even though we are editorially independent, no one's telling us what we can and can't publish, we're being judged on different standards, and learning to do that. And then I think the other part of it was internal education, right? The company approached us, they wanted to build an editorial operation. Not everyone at the company at the beginning was exactly on the same page about why. So, we had different stakeholders being we want acquisition, and other people, we want brand building. And so it was a lot of conversations about, kind of what we were going to cover, what the mix was going to be. I had built this bullseye at one point that I called the circle of contention. And it was because it was okay, here's what everybody else thinks what goes in the center of the bullseye. But here's what we're actually going to put in the center of the bullseye, and kind of getting everyone on the same page in agreement of from a business perspective, this is why we need to start building here, and then we'll kind of go outward.
So what did you come down on? What was your why at the end of the day?
I think we kind of landed in the middle on some things. But now we kind of look at it as different types of content having different goals, right? So the more editorial journalistic pieces of content, that is for brand building. And we are thinking about them differently. We're creating them differently. We're measuring them and judging them differently versus content that's a little bit more bottom of the funnel, traditional SEO that's designed for conversions. And we're putting it on pages that are more optimized for conversions and kind of judging it against those metrics. But getting people to understand that you can't have one piece of content that does all of those things, I think was really the hump that we had to get over.
That feels like very good advice, that this brand and newsroom can serve different purposes. Yeah. It doesn't have to just be under one thing. Do you guys want to weigh on that with your own experiences? I mean, you're both in the travel sector. Obviously, the content is hugely important there. But
sure. I mean, I think I related to what you just said about sort of the different use cases, right?
Tripadvisor is an esteemed travel brand. It's been around for 25 years. In many ways, it's sort of the big tent umbrella travel brand. You know, I have been in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, and I have seen the Tripadvisor logo on a cafe window. You can go anywhere in the world and see the logo. And with that comes amazing opportunities and challenges, of course. And when we think about sort of how we show up in the content space, it's that sort of curated voice element. It's the guidance. It's the conversational friend that's like your best travel companion ever. But what does that mean on different platforms, right? What does that mean in the thought leadership space? What does that mean sort of in short form copy on the New York City tourism page? Or what does that mean in an article that you get via email? You know, maybe you've clicked on the New York tourism page once and you're going to get an email with an itinerary for New York. Like, what are we hoping to get out of you in that capacity? And this is something that we talk about all the time. The brand building, like the brand POV, how we're coming out and talking about what's happening in travel, what trends we're excited about, how we want to serve our travelers in the best possible way. And then some of the more sort of nitty gritty downstream conversion moments and how do we show up for the people that are ready to book as well. So it's an interesting challenge. I would love to see your little circle.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is more complicated to have more metrics. It's not less metrics. It's like more metrics to be looking at. But I think it is really making choices intentionally and setting those goals so that it is clear. So, you know, we do that in different ways with like tagging for our data dashboards and, you know, things like that. But to really see, you know, we have this interesting conversation when people say that. People love to say, like, we did this piece of content that worked so well. It's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean, like, that it worked well? What did it do? You know, and you may have done very well in some aspect, but that doesn't mean it's good for every tactic in the future. It really depends on what you're trying to do. So really, like, intentionally choosing what you're doing and what success for that piece of content, whether it's video or, to your point, you know, video or written content or social. Like, what are we hoping to get out of that? And kind of. It makes it more complicated, but it's kind of necessary.
Yeah. Could I press you guys on what those KPIs are? Like for any, you know, various pieces of content, aside from traffic and views, what else are you looking at?
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at, you know, for our social channels, more followers, obviously subscribers. We're looking at, you know, watch rate on YouTube. We're looking at, you know, just a lot of different, metrics. Some of it is, you know, did they sign up for the newsletter then? So was this a piece of content that made them want to come to us at the Points Guy more often? Do they want to hear more from us? So, you know, just more metrics.
Yeah. I wondered, so, well, AJ, you've worked in a few of these different newsrooms.
Yeah.
And you know, this is a time where budgets are shrinking. There's a lot more pressure to prove your commercial worth in any company at the moment. What have been some of like the tips that you've picked up to kind of defend your work, even if, especially on that brand building side of things, when it might not be such an obvious investment to make?
Yeah, I mean, I've said before that I try to go to places that are truly making an investment and really showing with their actions that they care about content, they care about the education aspect to it. You know, that doesn't, but things can change. Leadership can change at companies, you know, things. So you find yourself making this case regardless, even if you feel like you know, came to a place that already was bought in. But I think something Jonathan said really struck me, which was kind of like the have a point of view. So my feeling is, you know, not to just say, well, you know, this is going to have an impact. We can't measure it, so we're not going to. We're not going to measure anything. You know, is not going to be helpful. The way I always kind of position it is, these metrics, what we're able to measure is the baseline, the bare minimum. And when we would look at that against some paid tactics, and it would be comparable. And I'm saying, you know, this, but we know it's even more, right? Like, we know this is happening. This is even more. So this is, you know, so presenting those, so measuring, not just avoiding the conversation, I think is really important. And then having that context to it of, hey, this is like the direct, being really clear sometimes on that like attribution window and things like that, what we're talking about, you know, and should it be the same as paid? And, you know, having those hard conversations, having the point of view on it, and not being afraid to share it, because if you're not sharing it, someone's making up their mind anyway.
Yeah.
So be a part of that conversation. They'll tell you if they agree with you, what they agree with, and, you know, and you'll come up to a better place, but don't be afraid to have that. And I've made that mistake sometimes.
Of course. Is that a case of just like actively saying out loud, even if you're not asked for it, like, hey, these are our results this week?
Yeah, or something. If you see in the marketing, you're like, I don't see organic here. Like, where would you put it? And they're like, oh, we just don't even think about that. Like, well, let's. How about we do?
I was going to add to that. I think that, Katie, your point is so valid, because I think that one of the challenges, and I'm sure you both feel this, just being a little bit more bombastic about your success has been an interesting thing to figure out with the team. I mean, the team is incredible, like seasoned editors and journalists from every incredible sort of publication you've ever heard of, right? But I think that kind of like nerds who usually work behind the scenes in a sense. And so just figuring out how to be like, no, you need to own this. You need to put that slide in the deck. Okay, what's a deck? Let me explain it, what it is to you, right? Like just sort of like you have to really frame up successes, and you're usually framing up successes who are not in this world. Right. So, okay, you can say, all right, well, here's this amazing multi-sponsor content experience that we basically directed the creative for. It's incredible. It had all this sponsorship revenue and it really hits like this cultural moment head on, XYZ. Okay, cool. But like, how are you going to explain that to the, let's say, colleagues on the sales team? How are you going to explain that to colleagues on the SEO team? How do you explain that to audience development, right? So you know that it's cool, but how do you explain that to a cross-functional group that doesn't exist in this world?
Right.
And that's kind of the challenge. I mean, when I started, I had never written a slide in my life.
No.
I only found out what a deck was about 3 years. I thought it was like a subhead. Yeah. Right? My husband likes to joke that I was an uncut gem when I started at Tripadvisor, and you work through the corporate, you put yourself through the corporate pipes, and you sort of have to figure out how to frame this stuff up.
Yeah.
It's a good professional development opportunity for the team, and it's a great way to get people to go to bat for their work, right? And not sort of rest on their laurels and be like, oh, that was a great thing that we did. Okay, well, now talk about it. That's the next step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did any of you, I mean, Tracy, I know you said you were in the business side of things and you spent some time and came back, but was that anything any of you did to train in this? Like, all these kind of econometrics or marketing speak, or even just like corporate speak? Like, was there any particular resources or training that you did that really helped you move into these roles?
Personally, no, but it's funny you ask that, because I'm part of like a former journalist group on Facebook. It's called After Magazines, if that doesn't tell you everything. And so many of the conversations in there kind of circle around this of like, I want to get into marketing, or I want to get into brand journalism, but I don't talk the talk. And I think the talk is not that different, right? It's like you master a few key terms, and like there were times at the beginning that I was like, what is CRB?
Google, right?
Right, exactly. But I think like it's not as big of a leap maybe as some people think, and it wasn't as hard to pick up the lingo as I thought it might be. So if that's encouraging to anybody in the room, I hope it is.
Yeah, I wasn't afraid to ask to be in a meeting, and I would want to be in there just to hear how other people are talking about some of these things early on, and then go away and do my my searches on what they were actually saying. But I wasn't afraid to kind of ask to be in those meetings so I could hear how. I would say I'd love to hear how you're presenting this to a sales partner. So I want to be in that room and get to hear how they were talking about it.
Yeah, which is interesting is like the journalism is actually the training, right? Because we're like, we love asking questions. It's our favorite thing.
Yeah.
So you bring that curiosity, I think, and ask those questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting to sort of also be in those sort of meetings and not necessarily poke hole, but ask your cross-functional partners, hey, what are you talking about? What does this acronym mean, right? And you've never heard it before. You're sort of asking them to explain sort of their world a little bit to you. Maybe it turns into a little bit of a brainstorm, and then from there it develops into some interesting pre-sales concept that you know what I mean? Yeah. Like the conversation can be quite unexpected, but that was very much my strategy as well, was just like every meeting I could get into, I joined.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it.
No, I love that. And it's almost like a superpower of being a journalist. It's like you lose all fear of asking dumb questions, right?
Yeah.
You can, yeah. Wonderful. How big are each of the teams that you're leading right now?
So my team is just under 50 at the Points Guy.
Wow. That's large.
Writers, producers, editors, strategists. Yeah.
Yeah, we are a much smaller team. It's myself. I have an executive editor who's here, fantastic. And then we have an SEO, GEO who also reports to us. And then we do work very cross-functionally. So we're working constantly with the brand team, with the partnership team, with product. And then we have a vast freelancer network as well that we assign out to. Right.
Yeah, I think we're somewhere in the middle. It sort of depends on where we are in the year, but it can fluctuate anywhere between 10 and 15 full-timers and contractors. It's a nimble team. We're doing a lot of work across the region. I have the team sort of distributed. So we're working on some advertorial content, which is new as of a few months ago, and marquee thought leadership content. And it's really nice to sort of be able to move people around. Obviously, you're going where the work goes and where the deadlines are. But you're also giving, old school capital J journalists a chance to work on concepting for big, marquee editorial programs, which, I think generally is met with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, even if it wasn't sort of the predictable path for those creatives.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to be able to have different projects to put people on.
Yeah.
And give people diversified workloads. You want to avoid burnout. You want to keep them engaged. Give them a chance to work across regions, across functions. So that's been really nice to sort of have a nimble team that can be widely distributed.
Mm-hmm. And how easy have you found hiring for these roles? As you said, there were many out-of-work journalists and editors out there, but do you find it's difficult to make sure that they really understand the role and how different it is?
My experience has been that the skills really translate. And I think we talked about this a little bit in our sort of prep call for this, but the biggest thing I've noticed, I think sometimes you're at certainly we're in a multinational, publicly traded company. It's a huge company. And I think that sometimes it's like, oh, content people are just creative. They're just sort of like chaotic, hectic creatives that don't show up on time, don't meet. But ultimately, these are seasoned editors, seasoned journalists. They can balance deadlines like nobody else can, right? They have this operational prowess that is unrivaled. And so it's been kind of amazing to watch those skills be transferable in this sort of non-content environment, right? How are you showing up for your cross-functional meetings? How are you PMing certain sort of projects from pitch to publication? And it's been sort of interesting and gratifying to see those skills flourish in that kind of setting.
Yeah, I think journalists are by nature so adaptive, right? Like,
totally.
We've been through so many iterations. It's like, now it's video, now it's social, now it's digital, now it's... So I thought, yeah, exactly. Like we've always had to be able to do that, to operate in this space. And so it's like, okay, well now it's GEO, right? Like I think that there's, most journalists kind of have a hunger to be like, okay, like I want to learn the next thing. And so I think like that's kind of like a built-in superpower too.
The metabolism.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we were talking about social media early on, and it was like, whatever you do, don't be on Facebook. You're not allowed to post on Facebook. And then it was like, just kidding, build an entire brand but also on your free time as you're doing this. So yeah, I don't think it's hard to find people who have these great skills that they've developed through journalism. I think sometimes it's harder to figure out, do you need a journalist? Do you need a generalist, or do you need a subject matter expert? It's a little bit harder. The harder part, I think, is as you're growing the team, and I've done that from zero, where I was the first one at Smart Asset, to growing that to a team of 12, to other places where I started where there were 2, to the Point Sky where I came and it was established. I think it can be sometimes the trickier thing is like figuring out, what do you need a generalist? Do you need a specific subject matter expert? What exactly you're looking for in that person? Do you need someone who specializes in video, or that harder thing?
Yeah. And have you found working with freelancers to be easy enough? And does that change anything as opposed to hiring for these people? And how are you finding freelancers in this world?
That's always been a part of the newsrooms that I've worked in. And sometimes it turns into people becoming full-time, and sometimes they don't want to be and they stay freelance. But I don't think that's been hard. Generally, it's been, existing networks of myself and the other editors on the team, or posting it as well. But
yeah, same. Yeah. Let's talk, unfortunately, about GEO. I know this is such a huge part now. It's the part du jour of this job. Trying to make this session as useful as possible. What has been working for you in terms of making sure you guys are showing up in LLMs? Where are you posting? What kind of content strategy are you going for? What's worked? AJ.
Sure. I mean, I think, Jonathan and Noah were talking about it a little bit, the idea, of thinking distribution first, of thinking before you're creating it, you're thinking about what as we talked about a little bit ago, about what the KPIs are you're looking for with this piece and where you're planning on putting it before you're even developing it, I think is so important. So yeah, thinking of it as another lever, another way to be discovered by new or existing audiences. And so that certainly has to do with the amount of creation we're doing, and what exactly we're creating. Where do we want to show up? I think is an important question too, because I think that I remember when we were early on in SEO, and it was like, oh, you're showing up in these, in all these places. It's like, okay, do we even want to be showing up there? Is that what we're trying to be known for? And I think that is even more important in GEO of like, what are we actually trying to be known for? What are we trying to be the experts in? And being thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty early into GEO, tracking like everybody else, but you do tend to start to see that there's certain platforms or certain channels or outlets that are the things that end up driving your citations. And so then it's thinking of like optimizing for those, right? Like, okay, what do we do? Like, does it need to be video if YouTube is the thing that keeps getting cited around the company? Yeah. Does it need to be a distribution, like a syndication play, if you're seeing, a national outlet being the thing that's driving the citations? I think what a lot of brands are seeing is there's really just a handful that ends up driving them. And we're still, I think, digging into exactly what those are and thinking about how we optimize them. But that's
can I push you for what your inkling is on which platforms are working right now?
Oh, I think it probably varies by brand. I don't know that there's like a one size fits all. We were having a conversation this morning, and for some companies, it's trade press, right? Like, so they really care about getting into trade press. We're more of a consumer company and a consumer outlet of editorial. So like that's not the case that we've found yet. But I think it is going to be, everyone has to dig into their own data to kind of figure it out.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that this probably underscores one of those, if you sort of imagine it like the slalom in the Olympics, where, we were sort of slaloming toward SEO for a while. I'm sure we were all sort of had different SEO initiatives going on to varying successes in the content space, and then are sort of slaloming to this almost pivot of that, looking at content structure, looking at what's sort of, how do you organize an article so it hits in the right LLMs, right? And then
literally in the text.
Well, there's a lot of sort of structural recommendations, but it's a little bit of a moving target because the second you get a set of recommendations, the model shifts. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. I would say we've consistently, honestly, this is not a cop-out answer. We've consistently been using AI tools for productivity and to minimize the overhead of sort of running an org within an org. A lot of sort of deck creation help, right? Notes synthesis. We don't have sort of interns, right? We don't have the scribes. We don't have necessarily the junior level support that an operation of this size would ordinarily demand. And so that has just been a huge time saver, and it's allowed so much more sort of creative ideation to come from the team and sort of time management and all of the productivity stuff. So that has been such a boon to the team and how we operate.
Yeah. I think, in my mind, I think about the GEO in the sense of as a distribution channel. It doesn't necessarily change the content strategy. I mean, the content strategy is still what it is, but it's one factor. So as you mentioned, like thinking about what the format that's going to show up in, or how exactly we want to, do we want to have video within that text as well? Those kinds of decisions it impacts. But having a strong overarching content strategy that you kind of are already aligned on then allows you to kind of think about that in much more of as distribution versus as like, oh, that's going to change our entire content strategy.
So you're not just slaves to the machine change. I mean, and like we already lived this through Google SEO changes.
Totally.
Now it's a lot of other companies and it's faster. Do you guys have like a philosophy on that, on like how much you care about it? Or do you just sort of like let it pass you by and think about it, but, stay true to, your main content aims?
I was looking at me, so I guess I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, like I do, like I said, I think like our overarching content strategy is still like what we care about, what we're learning from our audience, what we think is important to share with our audience, and then the the tactics, then we're reading what the algorithm update is. We're reading what the latest is. Like I have channel strategists on my team so that they are like obsessed with it. Like that's what that's what the goal is, so that they can really know those things. But I think of that as more tactic and more of like we're not going to shift everything, because I think that's a losing errand if you're going to shift everything completely. But I don't think it's either or. I think it's kind of both, kind of a little bit of both.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, just to finish up, I wondered if there's someone in the audience right now who's working in one of these branded newsrooms and like could really do with some more hands and some more resource. What would you say is the best way to go to the boss and ask for more of that? What's the best way to argue the case for this kind of business?
I mean, I would come back to argue the thing that they care about, right? Which comes from having that aligned agreement of like, this is what we see as the value and the point of this, right? If you're going to go head to head and argue brand with someone who really cares about acquisition, that's not going to work, right? So tell them the story not saying cherry pick your metrics, but kind of lead with the thing that backs into kind of what they care about. And build your argument from there.
I would probably talk about all of the different places that content exists where you can't extricate it. So like the analogy that comes to mind is almost like a stuck zipper, like a snag zipper. And that has been sort of our strategy. Like, how can we put content in as many places across this platform and in our distribution channels where other things are going to be reliant on it, right? And so that would be sort of that has been the overarching strategy as I built the team. And it's sort of, when I think about framing that up, I'm like, okay, cool. But we have this whole newsletter initiative because X, Y, and Z, right? So if we pull content back, then that disappears, right? Or we know that we have content on all of our highest value tourism pages, and that has shown X, Y, Z impact on users in their sort of booking mindset. So just sort of really thinking channel by channel and thinking about like getting tight on what content is doing in those spaces that adds not only sort of whatever metric what you're talking about, but how do you show up as a brand through content in those arenas?
The beauty is content is doing so much. So look for that data to show it. And I think it's a great point to kind of make sure you're speaking to what they care about, what the leadership cares about, and what you align on may change, but make sure you continue to have that conversation and don't be afraid to ask. Again, you have to have that conversation because someone's making up their mind about it, whether you're getting to have your say and getting to show that data. So do it. Show your point of view. Show your data.
Yeah. Beautiful. AJ, Tracy, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure thing.